Welcome to the Comeback Season podcast, where we bridge the gap between where you are and where you are meant to be. We created this platform to be a place where you can land during your hardest seasons of life and feel fully supported as you rebuild. This show is rooted in the belief that a true comeback requires a foundation of a healthy mind, a healthy body, and a regulated nervous system. I'm Christi Kelsey, co-host of the podcast and a transformational macro coach for women over 40. I help women step out of the cycle of dieting and into a more balanced, sustainable way of eating, while also working through the mindset and patterns that often keep them stuck. Around here, we believe real change happens when we support both the body and the mind. Joining me today is Mardi Winder, a high conflict divorce coach who specializes in helping women navigate high conflict relationships and life transitions with clarity and strength. Mardi, I'm so glad you're here today. To get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what led you to this work?
Thanks, Christy. And it's really my pleasure to be here and an honor to get to chance to speak with your audience. So I didn't start out wanting to be a divorce coach. I don't know anybody that's a divorce coach that started out doing that. I actually started out as a teacher. Did a degree in agriculture before that, then became a teacher. Went through my own divorce in the late part of the 1990s. Was only married for about 5 years, waited till I was into my 30s before I married, and I thought I was doing everything right. And really, I didn't have a horrible relationship, but we probably should have just stayed friends rather than got married. And unfortunately, through the divorce, what should have been a very simple divorce, we did not have children. So that made it what I thought was going to make it a little easier. It turned out to be an incredibly messy, complicated issue that just went to use the expression, it just went south so fast. It was not even funny what happened. And so I don't, the details of it aren't really important other than to know that I just knew at that time there was no way that that's the way that this should be happening, because it got very adversarial very fast. Both of us lawyered up and the communication stopped, and I mean, it was just a horrible experience. Fast forward a little bit, married, I was in Canada then. I am Canadian, live down here in Texas, but married a guy, ended up meeting a guy from Texas. And then we talked for a little bit and decided it wasn't in his son's best interest to move to Canada because his mom was here. So I moved down here, started working as a domestic violence client advocate. So I got to see, some of the real challenges that women are facing getting out of, and men as well, getting out of abusive relationships. Went into executive and leadership coaching, and then ended up going into divorce coaching because so many of my clients were struggling with their relationships that was impacting their ability to be fully present in their business. And so I've been doing divorce coaching now since 2015. I'm also a mediator. I'm trained in communication, and I'm just completing my relational trauma certification. So to be able to help people recover after being in these traumatic narcissistic types of relationships. So that's where I am. Sorry, that was kind of a long story. I
No, that's
apologize.
great. It's always so fascinating to me to hear um, people who are coaching or in a position to help other people, their pathway to where they are now. Because almost always they've had some kind of experience. Like you're not in high school or a child thinking, I'm going to be a fat loss coach, or I'm going to be a divorce coach. Like, first of all, that wasn't really a thing when we were kids, but it's
Yeah,
just not something that you hear people, talking about that they want as a career. But you just kind of get led that way because of
right.
your experiences, and you don't want people to go through the same thing that you did, or at least you want them to have better tools.
Yeah, and I had been, I don't know if I mentioned this, but also was a mediator in both in Canada and in the United States. So I've done, probably over the last 3 decades, a couple of thousand divorce mediations. And I
Mhm.
just Some of them went really well, and some of them were just horrific experiences because people weren't prepared. And as a mediator, you've got to stay totally neutral. Like, even if you know
Mhm.
it's a bad deal on the table, you can't say to somebody, don't sign that. And I just
Mhm.
thought, that whole idea of being that neutral person in the room wasn't where I was best serving people. And so that's why
Mhm.
I decided to move into the coaching, where I really could provide, that opportunity to get a better perspective, so that so that my clients go into those negotiations, mediations, or even consultations with their attorneys much more informed.
Mhm. Yeah. It's kind of like when I hear your story, it's I imagine somebody picking up tools along your life path, a tool here, a tool there, and it gives you a unique set of tools to help people in your situation right now. So that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. So tell us about what it's like to help people in a divorce situation where there's this high conflict.
So I think this is unique because it's very normal for people going through divorce to be angry with each other. Let's face it. I mean, if you were happy with each other, you most likely wouldn't be going through divorce. Although I have had, in mediation, I have had couples who come through the process who are both have acknowledged that, yeah, we're really good friends, but there's no relationship left here. There's no intimacy left here. And so they've been very amicable, and they've just really needed some support in creating that final
Mhm.
dissolution of the relationship. But when you're talking about high conflict divorces, and there's kind of two definitions of high conflict. So for a lot of people, high conflict has come to represent they're dealing with a toxic or a high conflict person. So there's one
Mhm.
person that is kind of in that cluster B personality, or at least they have some of those traits: narcissistic, borderline personality, antisocial personality disorders, those kind of things. And so these are people that use a lot of the gaslighting, manipulation, um, we've heard that the cycle of abuse, where they go through the honeymoon, and then they go through the disparage, discard, and then the cycle keeps going. That's one definition of high conflict. And then the other definition of high conflict is where both parties are actually unwilling or unable to be reasonable and rational and work through it. So I really work with both of those groups. But the majority of my clients are dealing with a high conflict toxic person. And because of that ongoing relationship, and because of the emotional abuse that goes on in those relationships, they're really at a disadvantage in the divorce process, because they don't necessarily trust themselves. They don't necessarily feel confident in making decisions, because they haven't been allowed to make decisions. They have been put down, they have been minimized, they have been um, absolutely horrifically treated for decades. And now, all of a sudden, through the legal system goes, well, we don't necessarily recognize any of this that you've been through. And now you're out of the relationship. You should be able to advocate and get out there and represent yourself in these cases. And that's simply not true. These people it's almost like they've been through a post-traumatic. A lot of them are suffering from post-traumatic stress.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of challenges for this particular group of people.
Mhm. Yeah. I have not been divorced myself, but I've had close friends who have gone through divorce, and I've seen how it can be kind of destabilizing for a while.
Mm, hmm.
And
Yeah.
and like that lack of confidence in making decisions, like you said, or that they didn't realize how bad it was until they decided to separate. And then
Yeah.
they're like, oh, it's not
Yes.
supposed to be like that.
Yeah, and especially when there's, like coercive control, or like we talked about, emotional abuse.
Mhm.
When you're in it, you're just trying to get through the day. You're not even
Mhm.
necessarily focused on all of the things that you're dealing with. You are just focused on getting through the day. And if you've got
Mhm.
kids, a lot of times as especially as a mom or as a dad, you're going to be focused on protecting your children. And you're exactly right. Once you step out of that and you're like, oh my gosh, I have all these options I can consider. I
Mhm.
can make my own decisions. Then you start looking back and thinking, I can't believe I stayed in that for so long. And then sometimes a lot of guilt and shame comes up about that. And sometimes it just takes a while for people to even realize the full trauma of what they went
Mhm.
through.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a really good point. I was just thinking about, there was something that you said earlier, and I was thinking, I wonder, so like when I had my first child, people warned me, like, you're not going to get very much sleep in those first few months, and but you just have no idea
Yeah.
until you have that baby and you realize, oh, they need a lot of attention, and I have to get up several times in the night, not just once, and it's not just for a few minutes, it's for
Right, right.
hours sometimes. And I imagine that going through a divorce like this is similar. Like, you've maybe seen or known people who've done it, but that until you do it, and it's your emotions and your kind of baggage or trauma or experience, it's you just have no idea until you walk through that.
Well, and Christy, I think a lot of people assume too that I hire an attorney and the attorney does everything for me. And that's
Mhm.
not, divorce is not a done for you thing. There's a
Mhm.
lot of stuff you have to do on your own. All your financial disclosures, your budget, your income, your debts, ferreting out where all your assets are, uh,
Mhm.
creating a co-parenting plan if you've got kids, understanding what you're going to need for your future to be able to establish yourself on your own. Like all of these are decisions you have to make. Your attorney, if you just say, well, attorney Jones or Smith or whoever you're working with, you make these decisions for me, or you go through litigation, and unfortunately, some cases that's the only way to resolve them. But if you go through litigation, there's going to be some person that doesn't know you at all, some judge that doesn't know you at all, that doesn't know your situation, doesn't know your kids, and unless you can prove that your partner has been abusive to you, they're not going to
Mhm.
take into consideration a lot of the stuff that you've been through. They're just going to make a decision, like basically split it in half and 50-50, here you go. And
Mhm.
you are really at the mercy of whatever happens if you're not able to stand up and actively take part in your own divorce, because if not, you're just
Mhm.
left with whatever those decisions are made. And they're rarely good for either party when those kind of situations happen.
Yeah. So, talk to us about um, like the kind of support you give to people going through this, and why is that so critical for someone divorcing a high conflict or toxic partner?
So, Christy, thank you for that. And I think one of the things is because I do have that trauma informed experience and training, I really work with my clients from the very beginning to help them identify what is it that they want to, how do they want to be positioned when they come out the divorce on the other side. And that's things like, do you want the home? And
Mhm.
for a lot of people who have been in these, I'm going to call them abusive, might call them toxic relationships, whatever term works for you, but the home is where all of this happened. And do you really want to stay in that home? There's a lot of people want to stay in the home because of the kids. Well, if it was a bad environment for the kids as well, do you want to stay in that environment? So really taking a clear look at, what do you want to do? Do you want to go back to school? Do you want to start your own business? Do you want to find employment? So we start looking at what that big picture is. And then I really work with my clients strategically. Who do you need to hire? Who are the right professionals to have on your divorce team? Because back in the good old days when I got my divorce, you just went to an attorney. That was it. Now we know that, there's certified divorce financial analysts that can help you determine what's your best options for your long-term tax implications out of a divorce settlement. Should you keep the house? Can you even afford to keep the house? Should you keep the 401k, or should you go for the savings account? Like, there's all these different things to consider. So I help my clients not only work on their own vision of what they want, but also the strategic stuff. how do you get the documents ready for your attorney? What do you need? How do you limit, and this is a big one, how do you limit the amount of time you spend talking with your attorney around non-legal issues? Because your attorney is your highest paid person in your divorce. So if you can talk to a CDFA on the certified divorce financial analyst on a free call on a consultation and
Mhm.
get some information. Do you need that, or do you need to spend $500 an hour to talk to your attorney about financial stuff when they're going to say, not really it's not really my alley to know that information. So I work with my clients on identifying the best use of their time and money in talking with their divorce professionals. And then I also help with them with the day-to-day stuff. How do you talk to the kids about divorce? How do you prepare for a conversation with your ex? Because I guarantee you in high conflict cases, it's going to ratchet up during the divorce. The problem is not going to go away, it's going to get worse. So how can you strategically plan that kind of stuff? So it's really a concierge style approach where I work with my clients where they need it the most. And everybody's unique, and everybody has different concerns and considerations.
Yeah, I see that with my coaching as well. And sometimes people just aren't aware of the options that are out there. So having someone to guide you through that and ask you those questions like, do you want the house or not? That might be really helpful for someone going through a divorce that it's already emotionally heavy and maybe they just don't have the mental capacity in the moment to think about those kind of questions for themselves. I think that's really great. Um, do you have any kind of success stories that you can share with us, or just little uh, anecdotes for in your coaching that you've learned along the way?
So I have a success story that when people ask this, it makes me happy every time I think about it. So I'm really, and because of the confidential nature of what I do, I don't share anybody's name or anything like that.
Yes,
But
yes.
one of the things one of the clients that I have that I think back so fondly, and she was one of the first clients I work with. So I'm going to say this was well, several years ago now, but she was in her, when she started the divorce process, she was in her late 60s. And I'm going to tell you, these high conflict divorces often last significantly longer than a traditional divorce. So it's not
Mhm.
unusual for some of my clients to be in the divorce process for 2, 3, or even more years. And that's a little scary to think of, but that's, again, these are people that litigate every little thing. So she started her divorce process in her mid 60s, and her goal, she had been in a PhD program for to become a psychologist when she married. And then she, as many women of a certain generation did, everybody just gave up their education and stayed at home to raise the children, and their spouse became the primary breadwinner. So that's what happened in her case. Her husband actually was an attorney and a very toxic person. But anyhow, what happened is she went through the divorce, and we planned how she was going to ask for things in the divorce. We looked at different spousal maintenance plans that she could potentially get. Given that, she knew she wanted to return to school and complete her PhD. And her adult children were very against this because, she should just be retiring and relaxing. And so she really had to stand up not only to her ex about this, but also to her adult children. And I was so thrilled that about 5 years later, I was invited to her graduation from her PhD program. And since then, she has gone on and done her clinical work, and she now opened her own practice, and she is a practicing psychologist. And I am so proud of her. I think she just turned either 73 or 74. And,
Wow.
this is her. She is working full time. She loves every moment of it. And to me, that is one of the biggest success
Mhm.
stories, when not only did she have the age thing was going against her, she was going through a divorce, she had the financial problem, and she was battling her own children to be able to live the life she wanted to do. And she did everything. And I'm just so proud of her.
That's amazing. I love that. I don't know who you are, but That's amazing. Good job.
Yes.
I think that, that's a really hard choice to make, because there does come a point in your life where you question, how much time do I have left to give to society? And it's going to take me time to get qualified to give what I
Right.
want to give. And so that's really amazing. I love that story. So tell us what it means for someone um, like you to be trauma informed, especially in divorce situations.
So I'm going to say this, and I may be offending people who work in the family court system. I hope not, because I don't think this is any big secret. But the family court system is not trauma informed. As a matter of fact, it almost always re-traumatizes people that have been abused. And as a domestic violence client advocate, I saw that firsthand, how, clients would have to go and testify to the abuse. Now, this was more physical in nature because that was several years ago before a lot of the emotional abuse stuff was recognized. But even now in court systems, it's not. And so, having to get up on a stand and talk about the intimate violence, if your partner raped you, if your partner physically assaulted you, if your partner refused to give you medical care, didn't give you access to the money so you couldn't get a job, you couldn't have friends. That's that's horrific to have to talk about that kind of stuff. So one of the things I've done is I have focused on becoming trauma informed. So I went through a training. I'm trained in hypnotherapy and timeline therapy and NLP success coaching. So that can all help with changing that. But the biggest thing is this relational trauma certification, and to recognize the time and the healing steps that it takes. And I want to be really clear, what I do is coaching, so it's not therapy. So I'm not diagnosing, and I'm not I'm not doing the therapeutic modalities, but it's how can you take a look at where some of those unhealthy patterns were in your life? How can you break those patterns? How can you rewire your neurological system so that you can be more emotionally regulated? There's a lot of research on breathing techniques, and I'm sure what you focus on with your clients, kind of, I call them the three legs on the stool of health: sleep, exercise, and nutrition. How can you incorporate that into your body? And also, how can you prepare for events that you're going to have to go through in the divorce that are going to be potentially more damaging to you. So if you do have to go to a deposition, for example, or you have to go through the litigation process, we can work on some techniques, even going into mediation, and know you're going to have to be across the table from the person who has been so toxic in your life. That can be incredibly traumatizing for a lot of clients. But you can learn techniques, you can learn tools, all of the ways that you can empower yourself and gain the knowledge, so that when you walk into those rooms, you have confidence, you know what you're going to do, you know what you're going to say, and more importantly, you know your value as a human being, and you're not going to let the system or the attorney or the partner or whatever, block you from recognizing your value and standing up for what you're worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And, you know, old me that didn't know about the nervous system and how to calm the nervous system would think of that kind of situation of having to go in front of people and talk about things like that, would get very nervous and emotional and probably want to cry. But now that I know these techniques, some of them which you mentioned already, I know that you can get into these kind of situations, and it doesn't necessarily have to be divorce. It can be any situation that causes you some kind of anxiety. I know that there are ways to calm that part of yourself down so that you can think rationally and without bursting into tears like I've been known to do from time to time.
Yeah.
So that's great. How can if someone's working with a professional, how can they be sure that this person has truly been trained to be trauma informed.
And I think that's a really good question, Christy, because there's a lot of trauma informed people.
Mhm.
So the first thing that I want to say is just because you've been through trauma and you maybe have been able to learn some emotional regulation techniques and maybe learn some strategies and techniques, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are able to support other people going through it, because there is a time, and I, with many of the clients I work with, I recognize that the trauma that they're experiencing is much more than what coaching should be treating, or should coaching never treats anything, but should be talking about that. It's not a coach appropriate topic. So I quite
Mhm.
often have my clients, they may be working with a therapist and working with me. So the therapist does the therapy, I do the coaching. So I think to make sure, first of all, check that the coach actually, or the whoever, even if it's a therapist, that's another thing. Not all therapists are trauma informed. So just because they've got those initials behind their name that they're a therapist or a LMFT or whatever it may be, you definitely need to ask, are they trauma informed? They should be able to provide you, if you ask, with wherever they have taken their training. And most of those training facilities give certifications. And if they, they will either be able to show you the certificate, or they would be able to refer you to the training facility, and you could, if you wanted to, verify with them. I find that most professionals are very upfront, and they have that information listed on their website or easily accessible through their website. Um, if you see anybody that talks about being trauma informed but then doesn't have kind of anything to back that up, it's worthwhile asking a question. And it should never, I am never offended when people say, tell me what your credentials are.
Mhm.
Because if you, it's like, would you go to a surgeon? And you wouldn't take out, just because you've had your appendix taken out, you're not going to go take out somebody else's appendix. So you
Right.
need to make sure that you are following up. And there, I mean, most coaches are going to have some kind of certification, but do they have the specific trauma informed work? And
Mhm.
it's pretty easy to follow up and ask that question.
Yes, and that is true. And I will say that I I was awakened when I learned that you don't necessarily have to even be certified to be a coach.
Right.
And I don't know if that will change in the future, but I mean, I've gone through several certifications. You've been through certifications, and I think that you just have to be careful and ask
Yeah.
people that you're working with what their credentials are. That's a very good point.
And I was going to mention too, Christy, so within the legal system, attorneys have to be licensed, they have to be part of the bar, therapists have to be licensed and they're regulated by their governing body as well. Mediators in most states, if they're not court appointed, anybody can be a mediator. So be
Mhm.
careful about mediators. Are they, I'm in Texas, so I'm part of the Texas Mediator Credentialing Association. I'm part of the Texas Association of Mediators. And I have to maintain not only my original training, but then I have to do so many credit hours per year
Mhm.
of study to maintain that certification.
Mhm.
So it's not just for coaches. Anybody you're working with within any kind of system, definitely check and see if they have any kind of training
Mhm.
under their belt before you reach out and work with them.
Yeah. What are some realities people need to be prepared for when divorcing a high conflict partner?
So I think I already mentioned a couple of them. The first one, the biggest one, is it's not going to get better.
Mhm.
Whatever type of um, toxic behavior they use, expect it to get more
Mhm.
significant. The other thing is, don't expect that an attorney is necessarily going to even say that they're going to use the fact that there has been abuse as part of your case. That tends to frustrate a lot of the clients I work with, because they're like, well, I don't understand why I've been through this emotional abuse for decades, and my attorney is saying they're not going to use it at all in court. And it's important to realize that in a no-fault divorce state, which most states are, and most areas are, even if you're listening in another part of the country or the world, it doesn't really matter. And the court is not, it's not a punitive thing where they're not going to award you extra in the divorce because you've experienced that. And that's kind of a reality check for a lot of people. Um, I think the other thing to keep in mind is in the United States and Canada, over 80% of divorces settle without ever going to court. So the
Mm.
only cases that get to court tend to be really high conflict, cases where somebody is hiding money or is not disclosing, or there's a fear that information has not been disclosed, or cases that are simply too complex to go through a mediation process. So do expect, if possible, to settle the case outside of the court system because you will save a lot of time and money if you're able to do that. And then the last one is what we already talked about is divorce is not going to be done for you. There's going to be a lot of work you're going to have to do. And your attorney will give you deadlines. They will say, like, I need this back by such and such a date. And it really is important to get it into your attorney because lots of times there's motions and counter motions and other filings, and there's only a limited amount of time that they have to get those filings into the court. So work with your attorney, not against your attorney. And that's a hard thing because it can be overwhelming for people that have never looked at the financial picture to all of a sudden have this, multiple page financial disclosure that they have to fill in, and they don't even know where the accounts are. It can be really overwhelming.
Yeah. I'm just curious, and I don't know if this holds any weight or not, but with the work that you've done so far in your coaching women who are going through high conflict divorce, are there certain types of people or personality traits that you see over and over again who end up with these kind of partners?
So this is really interesting, and it's a fascinating study. There's a lot of research on this, and one of the things that early on people said that kind of from the addiction model, there's the addicted person, and then there's the codependent person, and they sort of transported that into these toxic relationships where there was the toxic person and the codependent person. That is not right. That's clearly been taken out of the picture by research. What it is the toxic person tends to find a person who has a lot of traits that are like being very empathetic, being very forgiving, being able to tolerate a lot of stuff, having a high tolerance rate, having a sense of loyalty to family and relationships, people that are very good at keeping things looking good on the surface and making their partner look good, even though inside they're feeling crushed and deflated and they know there's a problem in the relationship. So what the researchers are calling those now are called super traits. So they're normal traits, like you want to be empathetic, but the people that tend to stay in relationships with toxic people are people that are very high on the empathy. In other words, they keep hoping for that person to go back to the wonderful person they were in the honeymoon phase of the relationship. It's like they're the endless optimists thinking the best about a person who simply doesn't have that in them to give them anymore. And so that is the pattern I see. And so once people are able to recognize that I'm not defective and I'm not attracting these bad people because there's something wrong with me. It's because I have these really compassionate traits to such a high level. Then we can start looking at, okay, now that you recognize that you've got those traits, let's look at how can you effectively create boundaries, and let's look at what are some of those red flags very early in the relationship that you were able to gloss over or you've glossed over in the past in many relationships. And let's look at bringing them to the surface so that you can go through your first few dates now with this checklist in your head or even on a piece of paper at your house, and recognize that not everybody's a keeper, and you are worth letting go of the ones that are not going to be there for you in the relationship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I can say that I've seen that myself and recognize that even though I don't work in the same field that you do.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of people, our fields would be kind of overlapping because a lot of the women I see are constantly told by their partner, you know, you're not good enough, you're not thin enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, and so they seem to be constantly on a mission for of self-improvement, but not truly for themselves. They're trying to appease a partner that's going to keep moving those goalposts no matter what they do, because that's part of their pattern. And when they finally make the decision that they're gonna get healthy for themselves, they put 100% of their effort into it, and they make these amazing changes in their physical body and in their, their mental and emotional health and their spiritual health as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really hopeful. Um, so what does it look like for your clients coming out on the other side of divorce?
I would, every client is a little bit different, but my goal is to have my clients come out the other side of divorce and know I probably didn't get everything that I wanted through the divorce, but I got everything I need and I'm going to be okay. I have the sense of empowerment. I have confidence in myself and my ability to make decisions. And I have a team of professionals that I've worked with through the divorce that can continue working with me post divorce or can refer me to people who can now support me. So I want my clients to come out feeling whole and feeling like I got this. They may not be all the way whole. They're going to have to, because if you've been in a bad situation for decades, it's not going to take you 6 months or a year to get completely, completely turned around. But just having that sense of hope and that sense of I've got a plan, I know what I can do, and I'm ready to take on this new chapter in my life.
Yeah. I imagine that just being removed from the constant daily awareness of that high tension feels more peaceful.
Yes, I think you're very right. Yeah.
Yeah, even though there's a lot to be figured out and a lot to be worked on, nobody likes to live in an environment where they feel like they're walking on eggshells all the time, or they're constantly having negative conversations or being in an abusive situation.
Absolutely. So true. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for someone listening today who is in the middle of this right now and feels overwhelmed, what would you want them to hear?
You don't have to do this alone. There are lots of resources available. I have a podcast. There are tons of divorce podcasts out there to listen to. I know for a lot of women, um, it can be challenging to reach out because there is a lot of guilt and shame and maybe embarrassment, and maybe maybe your family has said, well, we tried to tell you years ago and you wouldn't leave then, so well, you're on your own now. You may hear legal professionals that say things like, well, it couldn't have been that bad because you would have left if it was really that bad. Um, those are not people you need to be listening to at this point in time. Surround yourself with people that love you and support you, whether it's friends, family, or professionals, it doesn't matter. And just know that moving out of a bad situation is hard. It's going to be difficult, but it's going to be even harder staying in that bad situation if you know it's not going to change. So you got this. And there's lots of people out there to support you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Marty. Is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I just really, like I say, I really want to thank you, Christy. I listened to your podcast. It's fantastic. And I really want to thank you for shining a light on this because a lot of women are dealing with this very quietly and very silently.
Yeah,
And you shouldn't have to, like I say, you just shouldn't have to do that.
right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you?
The best way is if you go to the website, Divorce Coach for Women, and that's the number four, so divorcecoachforwomen.com. It's got links to books, podcasts, and information about me if you're interested.
Great. And you have a free resource for our listeners. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
The Resilience Building Blueprint.
Yes.
So, what it is it's a printable 28-day journal. And what it does is it has you do a little activity in the morning and something simple. Could be a reflection or think about something or go hold the door open for a stranger and smile at them and notice any changes. Or then in the evening, it asks you to reflect on that. What have you learned about yourself? And there's also a little daily gratitude journal that goes along with that. So you can print it out and fill it in. You can do it once a day. You can do it every other day. You can do it once a week, whatever works for you. It's just a guide to help you remember that you have a lot more resilience than you think you do.
I love that. Thank you so much, Mardi, for being here.
Thank you, Christy.
Today's conversation with Mardi reminded us that navigating a high conflict divorce requires the right kind of support, and that healing is not only possible, but powerful. When we surround ourselves with the right people and take intentional steps forward, we begin to rebuild not just our circumstances, but our sense of self. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need it. And remember, your comeback is always possible, one step at a time.
Thank you for joining us on the comeback season. Please remember, the conversations we share here are for informational and motivational purposes only. We are not licensed medical professionals, and this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or replace guidance from your doctor or your healthcare provider. Always consult your healthcare team before making changes to your nutrition, your fitness, or your mental health routines. Your health and well-being comes first, and we want you to move forward safely with the right support for your journey.